I'm Mackenzie Vaza, and this is 20 Minutes. The perpetrator would break into a ground floor apartment at night, wake up the female occupant, tell her that he was ripped off by someone who lived there, and then sexually assault her at knife point. He would shroud his face in a piece of clothing and cover the victim's head with a pillowcase. These attacks were concentrated in 4 Vancouver neighborhoods, and the perpetrator's modus operandi was distinct enough for the police to link the crimes together. Welcome to the story of the rip-off rapist. Ivan William Henry was born on October 22, 1946, in Regina, Saskatchewan. Henry suffered abuse at the hands of his stepfather. At 12 years old, Henry reported the abuse to child welfare authorities and he was taken into care. Therefore, it can be said that Henry lacked family ties. His early adult life included multiple prison stints for drug trafficking and property crime. His first arrest was at 16 years old. At the time of his arrest in Vancouver, Henry was on mandatory release after serving most of a 5-year sentence for an attempted rape in Winnipeg. Evidently, Henry had a previous record, making him more attractive as a suspect to police, giving him a criminal label, meaning he was already on the radar of law enforcement. Henry was also a high school dropout, meaning he lacked education and was living on the margins of society. Ivan Henry worked construction jobs and pawned clothes and microwaves, meaning he had no steady employment and was of low socioeconomic status. Being marginalized made him an easy target for the police. All of these factors combined contributed to Henry's status as an unfavorable defendant. In relation to public pressure, Mount Pleasant was a town broken into small municipalities with a number of different police jurisdictions, making it easy to cause discrepancies. At this time during the 1980s, a number of violent sex crimes were being committed, including Clifford Olson's 11 counts of first-degree murder against children and adolescents just 4 months prior to Henry's accusal. Olson's heinous crimes made him one of Canada's most infamous serial killers, and yet he was able to blackmail authorities to give his wife $100,000 in exchange for the location of the bodies of his victims. Mount Pleasant was a small community, and thus this community was greatly impacted by these types of crimes, which caused an uprising among the people and great public pressure to find the perpetrator of these sexual assaults. Ivan Henry's wife made a call to police and said, "Ivan told me recently that he had been ripped off on a couple of drug deals. He's been going out around midnight or later and coming home around 4 a.m. He carries a knife with him all the time." Henry's wife was compensated with $1,000. One daughter claimed that this was a lie to sustain her mother's drug habit. Paid informants are a controversial aspect of the criminal justice system. When a monetary reward is involved, the accuracy of information given is put into question. At the inquiry into the wrongful conviction of a popular exoneree, Thomas Sofino, Commissioner Corey stated, "Informants comprise the most deceitful and deceptive group of witnesses known to frequent the courts. The more notorious the case, the greater the number of prospective informants. They rush to testify like vultures to rotting flesh or sharks to blood. They are smooth and convincing liars. Whether they will seek favors from the authorities, attention, or notoriety, they are in every instance completely unreliable. It will be seen how frequently they have been a major factor in the conviction of innocent people and how much they tend to corrupt the administration of justice. Usually their presence as witnesses signals the end of any hope of providing a fair trial." Former Chief Justice of Canada, Lamer, sitting as commissioner examining 3 cases in Newfoundland and Labrador, concluded that the use of a jailhouse informant contributed to a grave injustice. Some contributions to the wrongful conviction of Ivan Henry were that police never checked Henry's alibis. Police also found sperm but never tested it to exclude Mr. Henry as a suspect. These 2 things qualify as police misconduct. Mr. Henry made countless requests for disclosure. Despite the Crown's constitutional requirement to comply, the authorities withheld all sorts of evidence that could have raised reasonable doubts about Mr. Henry's guilt. Non-disclosure and Crown misconduct played a huge role in the wrongful conviction. The attacks, which occurred between May 1981 and June 1982, were carried out against women living in ground floor or basement suites in the Mount Pleasant, Marpole, and Kitsilano areas. Henry, who has a history of psychiatric issues, represented himself at his 1983 trial. Henry's lower socioeconomic status prevented him from obtaining effective counsel and ultimately contributed to his wrongful conviction. After his conviction, he was designated a dangerous offender as per Section 753 of the Criminal Code of Canada, meaning his prison sentence remained indefinite. He maintained his innocence all along and tried repeatedly to get his case reopened. Mr. Henry's conviction and incarceration were unfair for many reasons. By virtue of the perpetrator's modus operandi, the identification evidence was inherently unreliable. The attacks took place in the dark. The perpetrator was a stranger. The perpetrator quickly covered his victims' faces, and the victims' memories were clouded by fear. The police relied on unfair lineups to convict Mr. Henry. Mr. Henry was forced against his will to participate in a live lineup with 6 other men without an opportunity to consult with a lawyer. The foils in the lineup did not match Mr. Henry's description. Instead, some or all of the foils were plain-clothed police officers. Many were taller than Mr. Henry, and he was the only man with red or curly hair. To make matters worse, Mr. Henry was the only one restrained by 3 uniformed police officers who had him in a headlock as he yelled and resisted. 6 women who were complainants at his trial viewed this lineup for several minutes. Another complainant was shown a photo lineup. In that lineup, the foils were all more than a decade younger than Mr. Henry, with noticeably different hairstyles than him, and they were all facing the camera. Unlike the other photos, Mr. Henry's was blurry and showed him in front of a jail cell with a uniformed police officer in the foreground. Human error is the leading cause of wrongful convictions. None of the physical evidence obtained by the police linked Mr. Henry to these crimes. This is despite the fact that several of the assault victims were sent to hospital for medical examinations, and the police recovered bedclothes, clothing, and vaginal swabs containing genetic material from the perpetrator of at least 4 of the assaults. Despite Mr. Henry's pleas for disclosure, the police withheld evidence. Both during and after his trial, they were required by law to disclose. This evidence included statements by complainants to police and reports written by officers at the scenes of the crime. This evidence demonstrated material inconsistencies that could have undermined the Crown's identification evidence. The police also withheld medical and lab reports regarding the perpetrator's sperm. Serology testing at the time could have excluded Henry as the source of the sperm that they had found. Attacks similar to Henry's alleged crimes continued after he was incarcerated. In 2002, the Vancouver police reopened 25 unsolved sexual assaults that took place between 1983 and 1988 in the same areas of Vancouver, and the assaults for which Henry was convicted. Another man who had been a suspect in the police investigation of Henry was linked to 3 of these later offenses through DNA evidence and later pleaded guilty to these crimes. On the basis of the similarities between the assaults, Vancouver prosecutors alerted the Attorney General, and a special prosecutor was appointed to investigate Henry's conviction and the potential miscarriage of justice. In 2008, the special prosecutor recommended that the Crown not oppose efforts by Henry to reopen his appeal. 52% of wrongful convictions occur because of eyewitness misidentification.
Recognize the member for Nanaimo.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. A very simple and important question to the Minister of Justice. Today, the City of Vancouver finally stopped trying to retry Ivan Henry, wrongfully convicted 35 years ago. The City of Vancouver settled. Will she do the same today?
Minister of Justice.
Madam Speaker, when a matter is for this chamber, it's for this chamber. When a matter is before the courts, it is in the courts.
Member for Nanaimo on a supplemental.
Oh, thank you, Honourable Speaker. Honourable Speaker, the reason this matter is before the courts is because this government refuses consistently to do justice to Ivan Henry. And to top it off, Honourable Speaker, I'm informed that now that the City of Vancouver has done the right thing and withdrawn from the case, the provincial government is considering hiring an amicus curiae to raise the arguments the City of Vancouver wouldn't. Further insult to injury to Mr. Henry, Honourable Speaker. 35 years ago, he was wrongfully convicted. The courts have determined that. The Attorney General has some fundamental duties. She has the duty to protect the honour of the Crown by ensuring the justice system carries out the requirements of due process, and to restore this honour and thus the public's faith in the justice system when the fundamental rules of a hearing aren't met. Honourable Speaker, it is absolutely clear to the people of British Columbia, to Mr. Henry, and to the City of Vancouver that what is going on in BC Supreme Court is wrong. So I ask her simply today, through you, Honourable Speaker, will she do the right thing? Will she settle this case and give Mr. Henry the justice he so richly deserves?
Minister of Justice.
Madam Speaker, the member opposite raises a number of interesting issues, all of which are before the court, and that is the proper realm for them to be, and we will leave them there.
In 2008, after Henry had already served 25 years, new evidence was gathered that cast doubt on his conviction. Independent Special Prosecutor Len Doust told the province it should not oppose reopening his case. During a Vancouver police review of old sex cases spurred by the murders of serial killer Robert Willie Pickton, evidence was uncovered that implicated another man of the crime Henry was convicted of committing. Vancouver police reviewed sex crimes that occurred in the city during the 1970s and 80s, identified a pattern of offenses that suggested a single perpetrator, dubbed the rip-off rapist by the VPD. In 2009, 3 BC Court of Appeal judges unanimously ruled to reopen the appeal of Henry. The court quashed his convictions in 2010, citing a number of legal errors and a botched police investigation. Henry had been convicted solely on identification by the victims, a process the appeal court ruled flawed. The court referenced a shocking police lineup photo that included Henry restrained in a headlock by a uniformed officer surrounded by what are believed to be plain-clothed police, all of them smiling. Attacks similar to Henry's alleged crimes continued after he was incarcerated. In 2002, the Vancouver police reopened 25 unsolved sexual assaults that took place between 1983 and 1988 in the same areas of Vancouver, and the assaults for which Henry was convicted. Another man who had been a suspect in the police investigation of Henry was linked to 3 of these later offenses through DNA evidence and later pleaded guilty to these crimes. On the basis of the similarities between the assaults, Vancouver prosecutors alerted the Attorney General, and a special prosecutor was appointed to investigate Henry's conviction and the potential miscarriage of justice. In 2008, the special prosecutor recommended that the Crown not oppose efforts by Henry to reopen his appeal.
Canada's highest court is expected to rule today on whether a man who spent 27 years in prison for sexual assaults he didn't commit can seek damages under the Charter. In 2010, the BC Court of Appeal overturned Ivan Henry's convictions after citing problems with the police investigation. The trial judge's instructions to the jury and lack of disclosure of evidence also played a role. Henry also filed civil lawsuits against the provincial and federal attorneys general, the City of Vancouver, and 3 members of its police department in 2011.
In 2010, the British Columbia Court of Appeal quashed Henry's conviction and entered acquittals on all charges. Justice Lowe held that the verdict on each count was not one that a properly instructed jury acting judicially could reasonably have rendered. It is believed that no one in Canadian history has spent more time in jail before being subsequently acquitted. In 2011, Henry filed a lawsuit in BC Supreme Court against the City of Vancouver, the provincial and federal governments, and 3 members of the Vancouver Police Department seeking unspecified damages. Both the city, representing the VPD, and Ottawa have both agreed to settlements, leaving only the province still fighting the compensation lawsuit. The issue of whether Henry is entitled to civil compensation for the breach of his charter rights has worked its way through appeals to the Supreme Court of Canada. On June 9, 2014, Chief Justice Beverly McLaughlin stated the constitutional question in this case as follows. Does Section 24, subsection 1 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms authorize a court of competent jurisdiction to award damages against the Crown for prosecutorial misconduct absent proof of malice? On May 1, 2015, the Supreme Court of Canada ruled on that question in Henry's favor. On June 8, 2016, Henry was awarded $8 million for his wrongful imprisonment. Henry had 2 daughters, Tanya and Carrie, who were aged 9 and 7 when their dad was taken into custody on July 29, 1982. In 2009, after their father won the right to an appeal, Tanya explained how tough it had been to grow up with a father convicted of 10 sex offenses. We were judged by the public and harshly looked upon, she said. It's been a huge family secret. We were kicked out of neighborhoods and moved around so many times to try and hide who we were. Over the years, we've come to realize things were wrong. His daughter, Carrie, died from an overdose earlier this year at 39. Her mother, Jessie, Henry's ex-wife, was the same age when she died of an overdose. In summary, the main factors leading to the wrongful conviction of Ivan Henry are public pressure, eyewitness misidentification, police misconduct, prosecutorial misconduct and non-disclosure, absence of direct evidence, and tunnel vision. Thanks for joining us. Tune in next week for a special on life after exoneration. I'm Mackenzie Vaza, and this is 20 Minutes. That's it.
Okay.